Okay, time to get started. So today we're going to formally begin our unit on the nervous system. I've already touched in brief a little on some of this, but we'll be going in more detail starting today, and I'll try to follow along with the book fairly closely. Part of the problem, especially once we get into the anatomy of the brain, you are going to find out that the particular author of this book who wrote this section absolutely loves to talk about the nervous system. And they go into way more depth than I think we actually need to or have to. So take a lot of that with a grain of salt, understanding that there's a lot of information here. When you do the reading, it will help you, but you may not need to retain all of the details, okay? Focus on the lectures. I will try my best to make sure that I cover the most important aspects of this. Are there any questions before we get started on this?
Are you recording?
Yes, I am recording. So, the main thing to consider here is control of information. Flow of information and control of information. Ultimately, the nervous system is what controls the body. This is short-term control only. Make sure you get that. Short-term control only. You hear a loud noise, you jump. That's your nervous system. I throw something to you, you reach up and catch it. That's your nervous system. Does everybody see what I mean by short term? What you may not realize is there is an alternative system that is both long term and sustained. Long term and sustained. And that is the endocrine system. E-N-D-O-C-R-I-N-E. The endocrine system uses chemical substances called hormones. Hormones typically do not have an immediate response. There is generally a delay. Everybody see the difference between that and the nervous system? The second difference is that the endocrine system allows for a sustained response, a sustained or long-term response. Your nervous system allows you to get up and flee quickly. But we've all dealt with effects of stress, haven't we? And the effects that we get long-term from stress actually result from a stress hormone called cortisol. It keeps you in a stressed state to allow you to continue to respond to the stressor. So number one difference, nervous system is quick and short term. The endocrine system is delayed and long term. Number two, the nervous system response is immediate and over. The hormonal or endocrine mediated response is delayed and sustained long term. And then the third is that the nervous system is electrical based, electricity based. The endocrine system is a chemical base, a chemically mediated response. Now, in fairness, the electrical potential in the nervous system is generated through chemicals, but I want everybody to understand that those chemicals are not what initiate the response. Is everybody clear on that? And then finally, the fourth difference is the nervous system is generally going to have a localized response, a localized response. In contrast to that, the endocrine system is going to have a systemic or generalized response. A systemic or generalized response. Example, I bring in something that smells good, and those of you that are hungry are going to want to immediately eat, right? You go through the actions of eating. That is a nervous system mediated response. You respond to the stimulus of the food, you eat until you're satisfied, and then you're done. Growth, however, occurs over a period of years, if not decades. I joke with my niece that she's growing like a weed. She just turned 12, and I swear every time that kid shows up, it seems like she's at least an inch taller. And when she hits into our sodas and snacks, she really gets into our sodas and snacks. What is it that sends that excess energy to growth as opposed to movement? Well, that is because of hormones. Growth hormone, human growth hormone, the pituitary gland. You see where I'm going with this? I bring that up because it seems far too many people don't take the time to realize that there are actually two distinct systems here, and these systems operate hand in hand to maintain homeostasis. It's not just one or the other. They work together. Very often, the brain will send a nervous impulse to the glands to initiate a hormone release. You see where I'm going with that? But the advantage of the hormones mainly is a sustained response and a systemic response. You don't have to constantly stimulate it. You don't have to constantly be responding to a stimulus. It's more or less just long-term on autopilot. Everybody clear on that? So what makes up the nervous system? Well, it's all nervous tissue, period. Third tissue type we talked about out of the four. And it is systemic. You find it pretty much in just about every part of the body. The technical term for a particular tissue or structure having nerves is called innervation. I-N-N-E-R-V-A-T-I-O-N. Innervation. Some areas of the body are far more highly innervated than others. I think that's kind of obvious for obvious reasons. Areas that are dense in sensory tissue are typically going to be highly innervated. Your fingers, genitalia, the lips and face. Areas that are not considered overly sensory will be less densely innervated. I believe I did the touch experiment with the fingers with you all, didn't I? And it makes sense because the very first thing you're going to do when you encounter something new is you're going to put out your hand, aren't you? You can see my coffee cup. It's got a series of ridges on this rubber strip here. That aids in grip, right? I can very easily tell that textural difference just by rubbing my fingers over it. When I rub it over my forearm, it's much less sensitive. Is your forearm a particularly well-sensitive area? No. See where I'm going with this? So keep in mind that the amount of nervous tissue present depends on the structure in question as well as its function. Structure in question as well as its function. So the way the nervous system works is this. Input, processing and integration, then output. Those are your three steps. Number one, input. Input is almost always going to be sensory. The processing and integration might be thought of as decision making. What does this input mean, and what are we going to do about it? I smell something good that I want to eat, so the sense of smell tells me that delicious food is present, right? I integrate that with the knowledge that I am hungry, and I decide that I am going to acquire whatever it is that smells so good. This leads to the output. The output is almost always considered to be a motor output. Motor, meaning movement. In this case, I'm going to reach out my hand and I'm going to grab a handful of popcorn and shove it into my mouth and start chewing. All three of these are involved in every type of nervous response. All three of these are involved in every type of nervous response. Any questions about that? The easiest way to differentiate the nervous system as a whole is to divide it into two broad categories. The first is what we call the CNS. That stands for Central Nervous System. This is the bulk of the nervous tissue that is found in the body. It consists of the brain and the spinal cord. The brain and the spinal cord. So obviously it's located in the head, the neck, and extends down through the back. When we get into the specifics of the overall structure of the nervous system, you're going to see that it's actually contiguous. It is contiguous. That means it is one continual structure. There is no clearly defined dividing line between the brain and the spinal cord. There's no boundary there that says now leaving the brain and entering the spinal cord. We as humans like to categorize things so that we may more easily study them, right? So what we've done here is we have arbitrarily drawn a line and said above this is brain, below this is spinal cord. And it's convenient and that's fine to do it. The brain is primarily involved in integration and processing. The brain itself is the integrator and the processor. This is the location of consciousness and executive function. It's the location of consciousness and executive function. By executive function, I mean decision making. The main function of the spinal cord is as a relay station. It receives information coming in, it sends it to where it needs to go to be integrated. Once the brain processes it and sends the outgoing signal, the spinal cord routes it to wherever it's supposed to go to initiate the motor response. That said, it may surprise you to learn that some inputs never reach the brain. You actually get the integration and decision making occurring in the spinal cord, which then initiates an immediate motor response. Those are called reflexes. The advantage is speed. A reflex is nearly instantaneous. It does not require or even allow for processing. This is one of the reasons that people always jump when exposed to a loud noise or some kind of surprising stimulus. You can't help it. It's not a conscious decision. It is your reflexes responding automatically. Is everybody clear on that? Am I going too fast?
Yes.
Okay, tell me to slow down. I can't go without feedback. So is everybody caught up now? Yes, sir.
So since the spinal cord, you said so the spinal cord, it's a relay station. Is that why the spinal cord injuries are always very bad because the whole line?
Yes. Generally, if you get the spinal cord injured to the point where it severs it, whether completely or just partially, that means you essentially lose all sensation and motor function below the position of the brake. It cannot regenerate, so once that connection is severed, it is basically permanent. And when I say you lose all function, I mean you lose all function.
So it's just a complete paralysis then?
Yes, just complete paralysis. Well, paralysis implies rigid and immovable, right?
Yeah.
The limbs technically are still capable of being moved. They just cannot be stimulated to move. Does everybody see the difference? You send the signal, but there's no way for it to get received. Very often people who are bedridden, who are quadriplegics, they actually still have to get physical therapy to ensure that their muscles essentially don't waste away. One question I often get asked at this juncture is, why do some people recover some feeling and movement after a spinal cord injury? Y'all ever seen that or heard of that? The reason is the shock of the initial injury often leads to an immediate immune response that includes significant swelling. That swelling can put pressure on the spinal cord and interfere with the nerve impulses. It's one of the reasons why immediately after a spinal cord injury, they try to stabilize them and they don't make an immediate long-term prognosis. Because you often just don't know how extensive the damage is until the swelling goes down. Can this interfere with life processes? Absolutely. The most obvious one, of course, is mobility. Being able to move, especially walking. Pretty much any kind of spinal cord injury, even very low on the spinal cord, will involve a loss of walking ability, because those are the lowermost extremities, so those are the lowermost and most distant nerves in the body. As you go higher up, you may very well lose control over some of the chest muscles. If you are a quadriplegic and you've actually had a severing of the cord in the cervical region, you may very well end up becoming a quadriplegic, which means all four limbs are essentially not movable, because even the arms have been affected. And as you might imagine, that is a very difficult case to be in. The thing you don't hear people talking about is the other life changes. A lot of people who have suffered such a catastrophic injury will find themselves incontinent, meaning they lack control of both bladder and bowel function. When you think of the location of the colon and the urinary bladder, it makes sense, doesn't it? Again, if it is sufficiently high enough and you have actually lost control over the chest muscles, that includes the biggest one, which is the diaphragm. And the diaphragm is the muscle that controls which necessary process? Respiration, breathing. What they have to do in that case is put you on a ventilator. You literally have a machine doing your breathing for you. So as you might imagine, injury or damage to the central nervous system is going to be, at best, a major trauma. It's most likely going to end with death. Make sure you get that down. That's not to say that it always happens. There are some interesting situations where you can actually have large portions of the brain destroyed or even removed and still live. But I want to emphasize that is a very, very uncertain thing. Y'all ever heard the story of Phineas Gage? Anybody know who he was?
Yeah. Didn't he get the railroads back through the...
He was in charge of a gang of construction workers in the 1850s or 60s, and they were building a railroad. Now, one of the things that they have to do to build a railroad is blast apart rock so they can actually have a level space to lay the rails. Back in those times, they used dynamite because that was the best explosive that they had. And it involved pushing the dynamite down into a hole that had been drilled and then tamping it down. And the item they used to tamp it down was an iron rod that was about maybe an inch, 2 inches in diameter and about a meter or so in length. And Phineas Gage, as the foreman, was tamping one of these down when it exploded. Now, as you might imagine, the same principle that propels a bullet out of a gun barrel, because that's the open spot, right? You got pressure expanding in all directions. Up is the easiest way, isn't it? It's the path of least resistance. So it drove the rod up, and it entered his neck right about here in his left jaw. It went completely through his brain and skull, penetrated, and came out about that far on the top. Most people would probably be killed by this. Phineas Gage was not. They actually pulled the rod out. They actually managed to patch the hole in his skull. He did lose his left eye. And he lived for another decade or 12 years. Pretty wild, isn't it?
I also know,
Question.
I also know about that, about Phineas Gage. It also changed his whole personality as well.
I was getting to that.
Yeah.
It did end up having severe impact on his consciousness and his control. He essentially went from being a disciplined, hardworking man to being someone who had no impulse control whatsoever. Gave in to pretty much whatever immediate stimulus he had. Hunger, sex, communication. If he thought something of you, you would hear it in no uncertain terms, and there was no filter on the language he used. But I want you to understand, the central nervous system is the critical portion of this whole thing. Anything that affects it is going to affect either the body or major regions of the body. Contrast that with the PNS, the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is everything outside of the CNS. Now, this can be nerves themselves, which are made up of bundles of neurons. It can be a single neuron extending through and into a lot of tissue. The PNS has two functions. The first is input. Input. All of the senses of the body are considered to be part of the PNS. Hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, feeling heat, feeling pain, all of that is sensory input. Hunger is sensory input. That is also the PNS. It's one of those that you may not think of. That's why I say we have more than just the classical five senses, right? Discomfort, an itch, is that sensory input? Absolutely. It's not pain per se, but it is an input allowing you to know that there is something going on with your skin in that location that warrants your attention, doesn't it? It may be an insect bite. It may just be some feather that's tickling you, or it might be an immune response due to a chemical in a plant that you brushed up against, something like poison ivy. That is all of the input of the PNS. Yes, sir.
So what is the chemical in poison ivy that causes that?
It is an oil called urushiol. And for whatever reason, plants in that particular family, the Anacardiaceae, tend to produce this chemical, and a lot of people have an allergic response to it. Might surprise you to learn that cashews actually are in that same family. Sumac, poison sumac, oak, all of those are in the anacards. Desiree is frowning. Do you like cashews? As long as you can eat them, it's no danger. I just bring that up to point out that a lot of people don't realize how common this can be. Is everybody clear with that? Can you become allergic to poison ivy at any time in your life?
Yes.
Yes. My mother used to never have a response to it, to the point where one time she got in trouble as a young girl because she spread it all over her chest and arms, and her sister did the same thing, and her sister, who was allergic, broke out in hives. Mom didn't have any reaction. She's in her mid-80s now, and a couple of years ago she was out working in her garden. That afternoon she came in, she was scratching at her wrist, and she wanted me to look at it because people assume that I have a PhD, that it equals an MD. I don't know why. And I looked at it and I said, "You been in the garden?" She said, "Yes." I said, "It's poison ivy." She reminded me of that story and said, "I can't be allergic to it." And I said, "Oh, yes, you can." That process is called sensitization. Sensitization. You become sensitized to anything. I have an allergy to latex. Reason for that? During most of my graduate school years, I was wearing latex gloves in lab after lab after lab. I probably had 2 or 3 pairs of gloves on a day. And now I can't even put them on without a half hour later, I'll start to get a little line of hives right here on each wrist. So that's the peripheral nervous system. It also is what allows the motor response to be affected. It allows the motor response because it carries the impulse away from the CNS to the muscles and initiates the movement. The proper names for these 2 branches of the PNS. The sensory or input is called the afferent division. The afferent division. AFFERENT. It literally means to go in. The afferent division is responsible for all of your senses. Now keep in mind, those may be internal senses as well. Balance, hunger, pain. That's still considered to be part of the afferent system. Is everyone clear on that? The other division is the efferent system. The efferent system. EFFERENT. That means to leave. to leave. These two divisions are separate, but they are also side by side. Generally, where you have an afferent nerve, you will have an efferent nerve either right alongside it or very close by. Is everybody clear on that? Okay. Now remember, the afferent division is hooked up to senses. Generally, those are going to be chemosenses, thermosenses, pressure senses, vibration, or electromagnetic radiation. Your chemosenses are your sense of smell and taste. They are essentially the exact same thing, just using a different medium to deliver the chemical to the sensor. Sense of smell uses gas, air. Your sense of taste uses a liquid, saliva, spit. In humans, taste is far more sensitive than smell because the molecules that you're tasting are typically going to be far more concentrated in the liquid than those you are smelling through the air. Does everybody see that? It also means that your sense of taste and smell are linked. Generally, if you have something that interferes with your sense of smell, you will find your sense of taste diminished as well. So if you have a stuffy nose because of a cold, you may notice that you don't taste things the way you normally do. Your vibrational sensors are essentially your ears' hearing. Your hearing is the result of vibrations being passed through a medium. That medium is typically going to be air. But I'm sure we've all felt the bass, haven't we? When somebody drives by your house and they've got some kind of hip hop on and they've got the bass turned all the way up and you're just boom, 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 boom. And your bed is shaking. It literally can cause it to shake if the energy in the vibration is intense enough. So any sound that you hear is simply vibrations being transmitted through a medium. Can that be a solid? Yes, it can. It can be a liquid. You ever heard clanks when somebody drops something in a swimming pool and you're underwater? You see where I'm going with this? Your electromagnetic radiation sensors, does anybody know what those are called? Your eyes. We only sense a very limited portion of the EM spectrum. We call it the visible spectrum, Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Those are from long to short wavelengths. The red are the longest, the violet are the shortest. You may have heard of infrared, which is going beyond the visible spectrum on the long end. You may have heard of ultraviolet, which is going beyond human vision on the short end. Typically, and you may want to underline that, shorter wavelengths carry more energy. So ultraviolet, for example, will damage the DNA in your skin. We call that sunburn. You go beyond that and you get into X-rays. X-rays are a form of what we call deep ionizing radiation. Deep ionizing radiation. Those can damage tissues deep in your body. Essentially, skin and muscle is transparent to X-rays. That's why it's useful for visualizing bones. On the far, far, far right end of that, you get gamma rays. Gamma is so intense, it punches through any tissue, including bone. If you get exposed to a large dose of gamma, you're probably going to die. Contrary to the Marvel universe and the movies, if you irradiate yourself, you're not going to turn into the Incredible Hulk. You'll just get radiation sickness and die. Yes, sir?
Don't they also use lead to block out?
Yes, lead can absorb gamma radiation because it's denser than any living tissue. It's just a factor of density and energy. Infrared, going back the other way, we can very often use that to see in the dark. You've heard that expression. What it amounts to is you put on a pair of night vision goggles and they convert the infrared radiation into visible radiation that you can see. You're not actually seeing the heat, you're seeing the goggles' interpretation of the heat. Beyond IR, you've got microwaves. That might surprise you. We said the shorter, the more energy, so why do microwaves cause things to heat up? Well, they are the exact right frequency to cause water molecules to vibrate. They are the exact frequency to cause water molecules to vibrate. If you make the water molecules in something vibrate faster, they're going to generate more friction. That friction in turn is going to be experienced as heat. And that is how a microwave works to heat up whatever it is you stick in it. And then finally, on the other end of that, you've got radio waves. Radio are very low energy, but they're very long wavelength. That allows a small amount of energy to extend them quite some distance. It's one of the reasons why you can receive radio miles and miles from a transmitter. That help everybody? Thermoregulators. What's thermo mean? Heat. Basically, these are in your skin. They're primarily in your skin. They in turn allow you to sense temperature. Your brain interprets this as a relative sensation. And when I say relative, I mean two people can experience the same temperature and have differing responses, can't you? Some of y'all may think it feels comfortable in here. From my perspective, it's actually a little on the warm side. Some of you may find this too cold. That's because we each have a different preferred range. The main thing about it is to let you know when the temperature is so hot or so cold that it's going to be dangerous. These use the same afferent pathways, which is why extreme cold can sometimes be interpreted with the same sensation as extreme heat. Anybody here ever held a dry ice in your hands? Even if you held an ice cube in your hands long enough, it can almost feel like it's burning, can't it? Because again, it's the same afferent pathways. Everybody clear on that? And pressure is literally the sense of touch. The sense of touch is just a pressure sensor. How much something is pushing on your body and where the pressure is located. Keep in mind that location is just as important as amount. If something is pushing on you, and it becomes unpleasant, you know that you can move away from it. So the sense of touch is literally just the sense of pressure. Now there are other senses that are involved. Hunger is a sense. You have a sense of balance. It may not be something you are consciously aware of, but these are still senses. What about pain? Is pain a sense? Yes, it is a damage sensor. It is an alert system. It says something is wrong. Damage to the system. What type of damage is determined what pain you feel, how intensely you feel it, and where it's located. I think y'all are beginning to see the advantages of the nervous system, aren't you? That localization is something you can't dismiss. Being able to tell exactly where on the body you are receiving the pressure or the damage or the heat is a very, very useful function. So is everybody clear on that? All of that is through the PNS and the afferent system. The efferent division, it can be subdivided in turn into two different divisions. The first is the somatic division, or the somatic nervous system. The somatic division is the voluntary division, the conscious movements that we make. When I decide to scratch my chin, that is the somatic division. Everybody see that? It is deliberate, it is conscious, it is something that you can control. The second division of the efferent system is called the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system. This one is involuntary. It's the autopilot. It's not conscious. You are not deliberately deciding that you're going to do this or you're going to do that. It basically allows you to run on autopilot. Digestion is an example of the autonomic nervous system. Your heartbeat. Do you have a question?
No, sorry.
Okay, that's okay. I just wasn't sure. Typically, the autonomic system is going to control the viscera, the internal organs that are critical to maintaining homeostasis. This is the branch that can initiate an endocrine mediated response as well. So the autonomic nervous system is what initiates an endocrine mediated response as well. Keep in mind there can be some overlap between these two. Can you speed up your breathing, for example? Yes, you can. You can slow it down to a limited degree, right? But you cannot stop your breathing. You cannot stop your heartbeat. You cannot stop your digestion. All of that is under the autonomic nervous system. Is everybody clear on that? So we have completed section 10.1. How many pages of notes you got? 3? About 3? Okay, good. So the two types of nervous tissue cells. We're now on section 10.2 on page 131. Or if you're following along with the paper copy, it's page 371. The two main types are neurons, which are the nerve cells themselves, and the neuroglia or neuroglia. Neuroglia, Neuroglia. Both of these are considered to be nervous tissue. Most people only think of the neuron when we talk about nerve cells. When I say the term nerve cell, it's generally understood to mean neuron. Does everybody see that? I want you to make sure that you take a look at figure 10.3. That is going to be your idealized diagram of what a neuron looks like. Does everybody see that? Okay. First off, you have the cell body. The cell body. That is the bulk of the cell. It is the round portion in blue. None of the little branches coming off, but the main bulk. Everybody sees the nucleus in there? That is the biggest portion of the neuron by volume. It has more volume than any other part. It contains the basics of the cell. The ER, the Golgi, the nucleus, you get the idea, right? And obviously its main function is maintaining cellular function. Maintaining cellular function. You see several short branches coming off the top and sides of that, right? Those are called dendrites. Dendrites. Make sure you write that down. Make sure you know what they are. Make sure you know their function. Dendrites, for all intents and purposes, are the receivers of the neuron. They are the receiver. They can be attached directly to a sensory cell, or they can be attached to another neuron. When I say attached, keep in mind, remember when we talked about muscle contraction, we talked about that gap called a synapse. There's always a synapse between a dendrite and its source of input. There's always a synapse between a dendrite and its source of input, whether that is a sensory cell or another neuron. Everybody clear on that? Notice that a single neuron can have multiple dendrites. A single neuron can have multiple dendrites. That means it can be connected to multiple sensory apparatuses or multiple nerves. It can form a network. It can form a network. When you consider that the human brain has somewhere between 80 and 90 billion neurons. Billion. I think you can get an idea of how complicated these networks can be. It's one of the things that makes neurology such a fun science to study, and simultaneously a very challenging one. Because trying to figure out which pattern of neurons in which sequence form which memory, I think you can get an idea. It's not the easiest thing in the world. So everybody got that? The next thing to look at is that long, slender thing. Looks like it is a blue wire surrounded by some kind of yellowish colored sausages. Everybody see that? That is called the axon. A-X-O-N. This is the transmitter. This is the business end of the neuron. When the neuron sends an impulse downstream, or upstream as the case may be, it transmits it through the axon. It transmits it through the axon. Everybody got that? The axon can be many, many, many times longer than the cell body. This allows it to affect distant parts of the body. Now, if you take a look closer, you see that parts of this axon are surrounded by what we call Schwann cells. S-C-H-W-A-N-N. Schwann cells. These Schwann cells lay down a layer of protein called myelin. Myelin. The myelin and the Schwann cell together act as an insulator. They act as an insulator of the axon. This protects the axon, and it means it transmits the impulse much quicker. It transmits the impulse much, much quicker. The more myelin you have on a neuron, the faster the impulse. The more myelinated the axon, the faster the impulse. Is everyone clear on that? The Schwann cells essentially maintain the myelin sheath. And if you get a breakdown of this, it can have severe effects. Has anybody ever heard of a neurological syndrome called MS? What does it stand for?
I can't say it.
Multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis. S-C-L-E-R-O-S-I-S. And multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune disease. Autoimmune. So that means the body's own immune system is attacking itself. It specifically attacks the myelin sheath in the central nervous system. It specifically attacks the myelin sheath of the cells in the CNS. This causes damage called lesions or scleroses. These lesions or scleroses inhibit the transmission of nerve impulses. They inhibit the transmission of nerve impulses. So what does that mean for the patient?
Numbness, immune response with like heat.
Numbness, delayed movement and responsiveness, sensory changes, vision problems, fatigue, weakness is a big one. Eventually, most of these patients are going to lose mobility. Most of them are going to lose mobility. And this is progressive. Once you lose it, you don't regain it. Make sure you get that down and know it. Once it's gone because it is a progressive disease. I have a friend who's suffering from MS. When I first met her, she was 28. I've known her about a decade, so she's in her late 30s. She was just starting to have some movement problems when we first met. She was actually asking me about my cane at the time because I used a cane then. I was able to increase my mobility through working out. I was able to get a little bit better. By the time we quit working together after 4 years, she was using a walker. Last time I chatted with her, which was last year, she's now in a wheelchair. So you see where I'm going with this? Think back to what we said about injury to the spinal cord. Same thing. You can end up with bladder and bowel dysfunction, if not outright incontinence, loss of balance and coordination. And since it attacks the CNS, not just the spinal cord, but the whole CNS, that can even end up damaging the neurons in the brain, which in turn is going to lead to cognitive problems, cognitive impairment, difficulty with memory, difficulty integrating sensory information. You ever heard of aphasia? Bruce Willis suffers from that. Y'all know who Bruce Willis is? He was a big action actor in the 80s. If you ever get a chance to watch the movie Die Hard, best Christmas movie ever, he was the star of that. Essentially, he's lost the ability to speak because he cannot make the connections between the word that he wants to speak and the proper sound. You may get sensory disintegration to the point where you hear colors and see sounds. That would make it very difficult to function, wouldn't it? So the myelin sheath is very important for protection. And that brings us up to how fast is a neural impulse? How fast is the speed of thought? Anybody want to take a guess? It's not instantaneous. Did you realize that? You literally can measure the speed, and here is the catch. It depends on what type of neuron and whether or not it has a myelin sheath. Not all neurons have a myelin sheath. The fastest transmitting neurons can go anywhere up to 120 meters per second. 268 miles per hour. So now you know how fast the speed of thought is. 268 miles per hour. 120 meters per second. These are always going to be in the CNS and heavily myelinated. The unmyelinated nerves that are found in the peripheral nervous system can be much slower. The slowest ones are anywhere from 0.5 meter to 2 meters per second, 0.5 to 2 meters per second, literally 18 inches. Didn't realize that, did you? Anybody in here ever accidentally hit a finger with a hammer or slammed a door on it or something, and you ever notice that it's a minute before you feel the pain? You register the hit before you feel the pain. That is because most of the pain receptors are thin, unmyelinated axons. They are thin and they are unmyelinated, and nobody's writing that down. So pain is typically your slowest transmitted neural impulse. Temperature is the same way. It's why you can get a burn. You put your finger on something hot and you pull it away before you even feel the heat or the pain of the burn. Because your motor neurons are very often going to have a middle between these extremes. They're going to end up going somewhere around 50 meters per second. 50 meters per second. So the motor neurons are among the fastest. Your slowest ones are going to be your pain and temperature. Touch, pressure is going to be kind of the middle ground. So are there any questions? I think that would probably be a good place to stop it for today. Is everybody okay with that?